You know, as a kid, I have been intrigued with 3D technology before. Now, I know what you guys are thinking that 3D technology was a fad and essentially every company that tried to make it a thing kind of failed. And you guys are obviously right. But when I got my hands on a camera that can actually produce 3D pictures, I was actually in awe and I thought that it was kind of awesome that one piece of tech or one small piece of tech can actually do something that might seem impossible when I was still a kid. So here's my review or my experience with the Fujifilm Real. I really hate this name, it's really long. It's called the Fujifilm FinePix Real 3D W3. And here's why I don't really like shooting with it. So the Fujifilm FinePix Real 3D W3, although honestly a mouthful and something that is really hard to memorize, is one cool piece of tech and it's one of the coolest things that I've ever held in my hands. It's a compact point-and-shoot camera that's able to capture 3D pictures and videos. It was released in 2010 and is the second and I think the last iteration of Fuji's 3D line. Almost everything about it screams Digicam, and for a lack of a better term, I kinda love it. I know you guys are mainly here to hear me talk about the 3D-ness or the 3D pictures that this camera can produce, so I'll just cut the spec talk short. This has two 10 megapixel sensors along with two lenses with 35 to 110mm focal lengths. It has a variable minimum aperture of f3.7 at the widest end and f4.2 at the longest. Obviously, the Fuji W3 is your typical run-of-the-mill Digicam. Well, apart from the twin lenses that is, and of course the parallax toggle. This toggle allows you to adjust the level or strength of 3D that you're seeing based on your preferences and your eyesight. As soon as you flick the lens cover down, the camera turns on with a graphic greeting you with the name of the camera and also a little jingle or chime. For me, this is super nostalgic in a way because back in the days, almost every tech company would have this kind of thing when you turn their devices on. It might seem corny today, but honestly it just brings back memories. One of the things that kinda surprised me when I first used this was the size of the screen. The 3.5-inch screen would be something we'd scoff at these days, but compared to the Digicams at the time and even cameras these days, that was considered big. But now that I look at it closely and compare it to other Digicams and the camera that I'm using here, I kinda see why it stands out. It might be because of the 16:9 aspect ratio. So the screen is not only big, it's also bright and saturated as well, even under direct sunlight. This offers for a comfortable shooting experience in almost any type of situation or condition that you're in. And obviously the screen can display 3D pictures and videos as well. The effect is cool to say the least. It isn't too obvious at first, but not too subtle that you won't notice it either. You do need to get used to viewing it because some of my friends have had headaches after looking at the effect for too long. Plus, one of the bigger downsides of this screen is the low resolution when you're composing the picture. Honestly, it's not the screen itself because when you do view the picture or play it back in the camera's gallery, the picture is just fine. I think it might be because of the lower processing power this camera has that doesn't allow it to show the full resolution when you are shooting in live view, which you are doing most of the time. If you aren't interested in shooting 3D, you can still use it as a normal camera as well. You could either toggle the 3D effect off with a press of a dedicated button when you're in full auto mode, or simply turn the mode dial to the advanced 2D auto mode. There is a catch though when using either of these modes. In full auto mode, it'll always default to 3D when you turn the camera on, so you'll have to toggle it off every time you turn the camera on. It isn't that toggling between 3D and 2D takes too long, but the addition of an extra step after turning the camera on can and will cost you a few moments here and there. On the other hand, when you put it in advanced 2D auto, the camera directly turns on in 2D mode. Though I wouldn't really recommend using this mode if you're looking to save some storage space, because in this mode, the camera forces you to take two pictures of the same scene. You could pick either the tele/wide option, 2-color option, or the 2-sensitivity option. The tele/wide option allows you to shoot the scene in 2 different focal lengths at the same time. The second option, which is the 2-color option, allows you to shoot the scene with 2 different filters that the camera has. Lastly, the 2-sensitivity option allows you to shoot the scene with 2 different ISO sensitivities. Now, these options might be self-explanatory, but the last one might need some explanation, to be honest. Because in the 2-sensitivity option, the camera chooses 2 different ISO sensitivities and will compensate the exposure through the shutter speeds. So it doesn't mean that your images will have 2 different exposures, or one being brighter, one being darker. It just means that one of them will have the motion frozen because of a faster shutter speed, and one will show the motion because of a slow shutter speed. This camera does have a manual mode as well, but you need to go into the menus to change the settings. The auto mode is good enough, to be honest. So I usually just put it in advanced 2D auto mode most of the time. My memory card is big enough that it allows me to store thousands of pictures, so I don't really mind the downsides of shooting in advanced 2D auto mode. Plus, I love the fact that I could capture 2 different focal lengths of a scene, allowing for a more versatile shooting experience. You do need to keep in mind when shooting in advanced 2D auto that the live scene only shows the zoomed in version of the scene. You should also be careful of your finger placement as well, because you won't really notice that your finger has blocked the lens until you review the picture. Plus, because of the different position of the lenses, you will notice slightly different angles of the scene as well when both lenses are at the widest end. Speaking of which, you'll have to get used to shooting in 35mm if you don't want to zoom in with this camera. Honestly, it isn't such a big deal, but it's something you should keep in mind if you're used to shooting with a wider point of view. Plus, you won't get everything in frame when you are shooting in tight spaces. One last thing I'd like to talk about before moving on to the image quality is the file format that the 3D pictures are saved in. You don't need to worry if you're mainly shooting in 2D because the camera just saves it as a JPEG. But when you do shoot in 3D, it saves it as an MPO file. I think some 3D TVs can show the 3D pictures in all their glory. The box does show an LG TV, but I'm not really sure what other devices you can use. For Mac users, there is somewhat of an official app called Xstereo Player that you can use to open the MPO file and convert the pictures into JPEG. For Windows, however, it's more of a hassle, to be honest. There's one sketchy program you could install called Stereo Photo Maker, but it isn't as feature-rich as Xstereo Player. You could convert the MPO file into JPEGs of the left and right picture, or you could combine them into one image where you need to use 3D glasses to view them. But to be honest, you don't really need to convert the 3D pictures into JPEGs because it does save one version of the image in JPEGs as well. As for using Stereo Photo Maker, it's honestly too complicated for me to figure out. So I usually just import the MPO file into JPEG and use a video editor to edit the left and right pictures so that it flips between the two. This somewhat shows a 3D effect, but it isn't the same experience as just viewing it on the camera. It's also the only way you could show off that 3D effect on social media. Now it's time for what you've all been waiting for, the image quality. I'm mainly gonna focus on 2D pictures, but I will sprinkle in some 3D pictures as well. So I hope you guys enjoy. For its age, the camera produces, I'd say, good images in the right conditions. They are fairly sharp and the saturation is just nice, at least for me that is. If you do need more saturation straight out of the camera, you could bump it up with the chrome filter that's built in. Personally, it's just a bit too saturated for my taste. The colors are honestly pleasing, leaning towards a softer rendering with the standard filter. It also shoots HD videos both in 3D and 2D as well, but I wouldn't really bother with shooting it in 3D because first, how will you edit it, and second, how will you show it off to people? As for shooting it in 2D, honestly, I wouldn't even bother as well because the resolution is just not sharp even for social media standards. And in addition to that, it also lacks image stabilization, so you will have really shaky footage. But if you are into that Digicam or camcorder vibe or kind of look, this is something that you might be looking for and is perfect for you. Honestly, that's one of the reasons why this camera isn't my favorite. If it's not obvious already, the small sample size of pictures that I showed to you guys kinda tells that I don't really use this camera that often. I mean, it's still a cool camera, especially with the ability to produce 3D pictures and videos, but at the end of the day, it's just a gimmick. The hassle of converting the pictures and the whole process that goes along with it just to show off the 3D effect is just not worth it to me, and it doesn't suit my workflow. Plus, I really don't like handling this camera. It's not that the camera is too clunky or too heavy or too big. There's just something off about it that really prevents me from really liking it. Nonetheless, this is still a cool piece of tech and history on Fuji's part. Even though I don't prefer shooting with it, I still appreciate the opportunity to actually have it in my collection. So anyway, that's it for my experience or review of the Fujifilm FinePix Real 3D W3. And as always, thanks for watching and see you guys in the next one.